Hey there, Ron Sullivan, your online hitting consultant. I want to talk today about the big pre-swing movements. And if you're going to teach them, maybe some helpful hints on stuff to look for, and so forth. I don't typically, I'll say right off the bat, I don't typically teach this big of a move to every single player that walks in. I think that if you go on YouTube right now, it's almost an absolute in this so-called new school of hitting, right? I guess compared to the old school way, that everybody's saying that you got to do these big moves to hit home runs. And look, there's no doubt, the science is pretty solid that these bigger moves will create more bat speed and so forth. The problem that you're going to have, most of you dads out there, and I'm not talking to everybody out there, so don't be offended, but the problem that most of us are going to have is that we're working with kids that are learning how to play the game. So if your player is in the early stages of learning, do not fall for the this is a necessary component in learning how to hit. This is not a necessary component. This move that you're seeing here is a level of proficiency that these players have that they're able to, within their sequence of their swing, they're able to add big movements like this to help them get a little bit more bat speed. Again, it's possible to teach young players to do this, but I think that you need to just don't think that just because you see it that that's what your kids need to do. There's plenty of video evidence out there of other guys that don't make this big of a move. Paul Goldschmidt, one of the best hitters in baseball, is a no strider. Okay, so you can look at that as well and see if that's something for your player. Okay, but so you're here because you want to teach the knee lift. And so as an instructor, I'll give you what my experience has been and try to maybe give you some ideas as to how you can teach your young player to do it. So the number one problem that we have to address right off the bat that I'm sure many of you have thought of is how in the world am I going to give my player this big of a move and they're going to be able to control their momentum? Let's face it, a lot of you that are watching this right now still have players that lunge at the ball a little bit with a little step, right? And so big stride at the highest level doesn't equate to lunging because these guys control their momentum and they control their weight shift better than your kids do, right? And so when you see this picture, and I think of an 8 or 9 year old getting to this spot, I cringe a little bit because I know that they're not going to be able to control their momentum the way these guys do. Okay, and so this is a very difficult move, but nonetheless, if you want to teach it, and I do teach older players this move because it will create more power and it will create more pop. But the way that you teach it, I think, is really important. So let me put out a word of caution. What Josh Donaldson and David Ortiz are doing, although they look exactly the same at this point, it is actually completely different, right? Josh Donaldson uses a lot more momentum going, or we should say linear momentum into his stride than Big Poppy does. He counts on a lot of separation, right? And that creates ultimately a tremendous amount of bat speed for Josh Donaldson. He goes a long way in his stride. This is very common in every single swing that Donaldson does. He'll be really close to this position. I don't know about you, but look, being real, okay, I don't know that 8 and 9 year olds need to be this far in their stride. Why is that? Well, first and foremost, I would say, being a responsible instructor on YouTube and giving information out to the masses, you need to make sure that your players understand how to hit this position before you even consider a big weight shift. This is very critical. All these guys come really close to the same spot every time they land. And the reason why I'm telling you this is chances are your young player doesn't. So if I were you, I would first and foremost, as a responsible coach and as a parent, I would try to get them to hit this position first before I even think about giving them a big leg kick. Okay, so let's say now that your player has developed some proficiency around making sure that he lands in a good position to attack the ball, and you want to do the leg lift. I would, if this is your first step, I would stick really close to what may be a Dominican style or maybe a Big Poppy style. And what is the difference in what they're doing? Well, if you watch David Ortiz from the beginning, now you got to remember this is a home run derby, And I know that Big Poppy's trying to hit the ball as far as possible. This is the where the spotlight shines on the biggest egos in baseball, and they're out there trying to perform and hit the ball as far as possible. You see where his front foot is, or at least where his front leg is starting. If you notice something in this process, his front leg is going to come right back down in the same spot, right? This isn't a home run derby approach really as much as this is David Ortiz's approach, where he's not trying to gain ground, right? He's trying to create more ground force, right? He knows how important leverage is when he drives, and so he's not concentrating on how much momentum he can gain in his stride. He's concentrating on how much more ground force he can get to help him unload the swing. All right, so ultimately the power doesn't come from linear movement, and I'm not saying that that doesn't help, obviously, but ultimately where the power comes from is when they're putting more weight into the ground, right? Obviously, because their foot's off the ground, they're putting more weight into the ground, and the harder and more that these players can control that momentum, the more bat speed they're going to have from ground force, putting more weight into the front side, and their ability to stay back. Controlling that movement is very important. But when we're teaching kids to do this, it's really important to take the Castellanos approach or a David Ortiz approach, that we're just going back to the same place that I picked up from, right? And so in doing that, one of the ways that you can practice that, and obviously I recommend that you practice this on a tee and not in your first game, right? But putting markers at their feet, right? To show where they're starting. And as far as a width goes, obviously you can't have your feet too close together here. I recommend maybe putting the bat down and then putting some markers down at the ends, at the knob end and the barrel end, and then lining their feet up to that, right? And then having them practice picking up the knee and then putting the leg back down in the same exact spot. This is ultimately, I don't think this is, you don't have to say this is permanent, but what this does is it helps players understand that we're not going anywhere. We're not trying to go to the ball. We're trying to go up and go back down to where we came from. We're establishing more momentum, going into the ground and staying back from that point. The staying back part is really hard for young players. So what you want to do with the markers that you set at the front foot and the back foot, right in the middle of the body, put a marker where their head is before they start the swing, and then challenge them when that front foot comes down that they're going to keep their head behind that marker, and this will help them stay back as well. This move right here is meaningless if players don't know how to control their momentum. Okay, and so before we start adding a move like what Donaldson does, where he's gaining a lot of ground, which could create a little bit more momentum, I would just get them to learn to control their momentum. So the big knee lift, back down and straight back and down into the ground where they came from. And as far as how they control or how they pick up their knee, that's really important too. What I try to get players to feel when they're lifting their front knee is that we're peeling the heel off the ground. Or we're lifting the foot with the knee, right? And that's really important because a lot of times, and you'll see it immediately when you start working with your player. A lot of times when they lift this leg, they'll use this backside or their upper body or their hips to help pull the leg up in the air. What I want them to feel is the knee lifting the foot. If the knee lifts the foot, then the heel will come up first, and then the toe will come up off the ground. But that's really important because what we're trying to do down below, we're not trying to interrupt what we're doing with the upper half, right? And so if you see your player lifting their knee and their hands and body begin to raise up, then they're lifting the knee with their body. They need to learn to lift the knee with their, or lift their foot, I should say, with their knee. Right? And look, obviously all these muscles are playing a part in that, but it's a feeling that you can give them or you can tell them that will try to create less interference with this upper half. Again, it's really important that the upper half doesn't get disturbed by this knee lift. You know, I know that David Ortiz is doing a hand hitch here. I don't recommend that right now at this stage you're learning. I recommend that your player be in a position close to where Ortiz is there, and when he raises his knee, that the upper half and the hands will not be interrupted in this flow, right? So that we can try to maintain a good sequence all the way into the ground. Okay, see if this stuff helps, man. Again, I don't recommend it for everybody, but it's certainly something you can play around with and to see if it's something that your player can do. And but again, go back to this position right here is the most important position. If your player does this, then you have a chance for a knee lift being effective. If they're out of position when they're dropping into their weight shift, in their current weight shift, then they're really going to be out of position when you drop in with the big weight shift. All right. Hey, Ron Sullivan, your online hitting consultant. See you.